Bright QT. Every student matters.
So now students, let's talk about the fifth stage while we are talking about the course of the French Revolution. Now here, before this you have learnt about the four stages in which the French Revolution it unfolded, right? So in the fourth stage, what did we learn? In the fourth stage, we saw how the constitution was formed, right? So after 1789, what happened? Mob fury, it escalated, right? And the king and queen, they were forced to flee from Versailles and to leave the palace and never return back. In 1791, finally we see that France, it now becomes a constitutional monarchy with the draft that was completed in 1791 of the constitution that we are talking about. We also talked about the Declaration of Rights of Man, that now it was a final blow to the authority of the church. Now, why was it a final blow to the authority of the church? So, basically we saw that all the assets, all the lands that were taken by the church or that were owned by the church was now confiscated, and also they had to owe their allegiance to the government. Again, this civil constitution of clergy, it was also passed. Now, according to this law, the clergy, then the bishops and other people, they were now paid like civil servants. So, these were some of the important points that we have learnt in our previous part, in the fourth stage. Now, talking about the fifth stage, students, we are going to see now how things were changing in France, right? Still people, they are now going on fighting, protesting about different things. Now they were demanding a lot of things here, but the king, was he going to approve to all of those demands? Let us try to understand that what happened in the fifth stage here. So in this stage, we are going to talk in two sections. The first one is talking about the wars, and the second one is talking about the reign of terror. Very important point here, I must tell you. Now, right now, we were talking about the constitution that was adopted in 1791. So, we see here that king, who was Louis XVI, he was not quite happy with the constitution. And why would he be happy about that? Definitely, his powers are now going to be challenged by the constitution, by the people who are going to govern here, right? So, therefore, his powers are now limited. That was the main aim of the constitution. So therefore, king was not happy with the new constitution, but he had to accept it forcefully. At the same time, what was happening here? When we are talking about wars, on 20th and 21st June 1791, King Louis and his family, they left the Tuileries Palace in Paris and fled towards the Austrian border in disguise. Now, what was happening? He knew that he is losing power in France. And here, King Louis and his family, when we are talking about Queen, whose name was Marie Antoinette, right? And she was the sister of King Leopold II, who was the king of Austria. So, basically, King Louis XVI here is now thinking that he is going to take help from the Austrian king here, that he might help. So he wanted the nobles to rally there, and in disguise, he went to this Austrian borders, right, along the Austrian border in order to flee from this place, bring back the army from there and try to challenge or try to now defeat the revolutionaries, right? But at the same time, what happened? Now see the luck here of King Louis XVI. Louis, he hoped to get the support of the Austrians, but he was recognized at Varennes and he was brought back to Paris on 25th June. Now, while he was trying to flee, while he was going to Austrian border here in order to get help from the Austrians, the Austrian king there, so he saw or he was recognized by these mob who were stationed there, who were kept an eye on the king. So basically they saw him, they captured him and they brought him back to Paris on 25th June. Now he was forced to give an oath or loyalty to the constitution. Oath of loyalty to the constitution that we are talking about here. But at the same time again, when we are talking about different things that are happening simultaneously in France, we see that different groups are now emerging in this region with different ideologies. Now there were these moderates, right? But there are these extremist groups who believed in overthrowing the government through violent means only, right? So here let us talk about the different groups in National Assembly that we learnt about earlier. So the first group here is Girondins. These were the largest group that wanted war against all despots. So these were the people who wanted to challenge the authority of the king. Now the second group here, the most popular group here is the Jacobins. These were the most ruthless group who did not want war and considered it a threat to revolution. Yes, students. Now, when we are talking about Jacobins, it is important for you to focus on this group. Why? Because later on, when you will learn about Reign of Terror, you will see that he was the leader. The person that we are going to talk about was the leader of this Jacobin club. Okay? So, Jacobins, who were these people? So, they belonged to very less prosperous sections of the society. So these people who worked as artisans, daily wage workers, or they worked in pastry shops. So these people who did minimal work there, or they had minimal income there, not minimal work but minimal income there, belonging to the less prosperous section of the French society. These were the people who called themselves as Jacobins, about which we are going to learn in detail right further. So these were the most ruthless group here. They were not in favor of any war. Why? Because they thought that these wars are now threat to a revolution, right? So they are going to distract people from the main idea. Okay. The third group here is Feuillants. They wanted war because they expected, like the kings, that the French to lose and restore monarchy again. So they were in the favor of monarchy and they were also in the favor of war, right? So here these groups were there. These were the three major groups, but we are specifically going to discuss some points about the Jacobins. Now, here what are we seeing? That different groups with different ideologies, they are growing, right? And at the same time, tensions it rose among the neighboring regions, right? So, King Leopold II. Now, if I ask you, who is this King Leopold II? What are you going to answer? Yes, we just read it right now. King Leopold II, he was the Austrian king and his sister's name was Marie Antoinette, right? And who was she? She was the wife of King Louis XVI. So we had read about these points here earlier right now. So please do not forget it. Now moving on. King Leopold II, he now invited the rulers of Russia, Prussia, England, Spain in order to reestablish the monarchy in France. Now he was very much upset with the ongoing situation in France and he wanted to help King Louis XVI. King Louis XVI, he also went to the Austrian borders in order to get help, but somehow he was unsuccessful. And therefore, King Leopold II, he wanted to help him. But he only got the support from Prussia and not these other places here, right? So volunteers, they also came forward to fight during this period of time, right? And at the same time, the mob here, right? the common people, they also got to know about these people, the neighboring countries who were now trying to help King Louis XVI. Now, King Louis XVI, he went on having secret negotiations with Prussia, Austria. These were the two regions that were helping King Louis XVI in order to win his authority back. So, on August 16, 1792, Paris mob, they stormed the palace of Tuileries. Now again, see here the king and the queen, they were living, right? So they stormed this palace as they got to know that these countries, these neighboring regions, they are going to help, and they now declared war against Austria and Prussia here, right? And at the same time, they attacked or they stormed the palace of Tuileries, and the royal family was sent to prison. Now finally they wanted to take action against the king and his behavior time and again that was happening here in France. He was quite helpless and he was feeling quite powerless, that he wanted other neighboring regions to help him in order to restore monarchy back in France. But was it the situation here that was going to be successful in France? Definitely not. Let us see what were some other things that were happening here. So finally, what are we seeing here? That elections took place, people above the age of 21, they voted in favor of keeping the royal family in prison, that we read just right now. And finally, in January 1793, what happened? King was tried and found guilty of treason. Treason here, it means betrayal towards one's own country, right? So we see that the king was tried and on basis of treason he was found guilty, right? And therefore a person who was found guilty was punished and it was sentenced to death, and therefore again on 21st January 1793, king was publicly guillotined, right students? So here again we are going to talk about guillotine. Guillotine is a device with two poles and a blade that was used to perform execution in France. A person who was found guilty of treason was punished by guillotine, right, using guillotine. And execution of Louis XVI, it led Britain, Holland and Spain to form coalition and attack France in 1793. At the same time, you see that the neighboring countries, the neighboring states here, they were finding a chance in order to attack France. Now, in the beginning of the chapter only, I told you that the importance of France in whole of Europe was quite important, right? So here, significant or important, whatever you can say here. So these regions such as Britain, Holland and Spain, they formed coalition and they saw that France is not in a good state, in a good condition, right? Financial crisis is happening, the constitution has been formed, the king has been executed. So it was a perfect chance for them to get to this region, to occupy this region or to attack on this region, right? So in 1793, they attacked France, okay? Now coming to the question section here, there is a question, which emperor of France was publicly guillotined in January 1793? What are you going to answer? Options are Louis 14, 15, 16 and 17. You have just read about one Louis here, that is Louis 16. So the correct answer is C.